Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Thursday, the 8th of October, 2020. Welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. My name is Pete Fairbairn, and we're here to talk about some of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport. As always, and there's so much happening in the world of sport that we probably could have come up with 20 topics. We're going to fire through 5 of them in short, sharp fashion. And real pleasure to welcome to the show for the very first time from the Age newspaper, the chief racing writer, Damien Ractliffe. How are you, mate?
I'm well, mate. Anytime you want me on to chat sport, I'm available. So this sounds like this will be a good day to chat sport.
Mate, it absolutely will be. And we're going to take advantage of having you on the show. And we're going to lean quite AFL skewed today, and also with some racing and some cricket to finish off. But we are going to start with a story from your newspaper, The Age, from your colleague Sam McClure. And he's looking at the, I won't call it a bombshell announcement because I think we all thought it was coming, but the announcement that came out yesterday from the Essendon Football Club that Joe Daniher has advised them that he would like to exercise his rights as a free agent and leave that football club. He's nominated the Brisbane Lions as the team that he would most like to play for in 2021. And I guess following the protracted trade saga of just under 12 months ago, or just over 12 months ago, when he did nominate the Sydney Swans and the Bombers and Swans couldn't get the deal done, it always seemed unlikely that he would stay at that football club beyond 2020. It comes on the back of Adam Sard, and I spoke about that yesterday with Nat Ioannidis on the show. He's asked to be traded to Carlton. Connor McKenna's already returned to Ireland. Orazio Fantasia, he looks like he's wanting to agitate for a move back to South Australia. But the key element of McClure's story today is that he's looked at what deal Brisbane might put to Joe Daniher and how that would affect the compensation pick awarded to the Essendon Football Club under the free agency, and also any incentives in the deal and how that would impact it as well. What do you think the fair compensation is for Joe Daniher, Damien? How's he going to fit in at the Lions, and what type of deal are they going to offer? A guy who's only played 18 matches, I think, in the last 4 years due to injury.
Well, I think the premise of Sam's story is that if Essendon don't get probably a high first-round pick in compensation for Daniher, then they're sort of threatened to match the offer that Brisbane are putting to them, so that Brisbane are forced to come to the trade table. And I think a high first-round pick is probably worth it. I know he hasn't played a lot of footy in the last 3 years, but at his best in 2017, he kicked 65 goals. He's an electric forward. He came back and played a couple of games this year after finally overcoming his injury woes, and he hit the scoreboard. So he's a damaging forward. He's going to add a lot to Brisbane. There's probably been a lot of weight on the shoulders of Eric Hipwood, but if you've got Daniher and Hipwood in that side, and Brisbane are already in a preliminary final this year, and some of the young talent they've got, you add Daniher to that, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. So Sam's story that the base salary is around $700,000, and then you're adding on incentives after that. Well, Sam's saying that the AFL aren't including those extra incentives for goals kicked and games played when they calculate the compensation. So, look, I think he's probably worth a high first-round pick, whether it's a pick 5 or pick 6. Essendon probably finished about 8th or 9th, so it would probably be a pick that follows their first-round pick around 8 or 9.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. We saw obviously with Tom Lynch joining the Tigers that even an elite, premiership winning in that case team, the injection of another quality key forward can transform their setup, and really the prospect of Hipwood and Daniher playing alongside one another is pretty intimidating for other clubs. The other element of the story we need to touch on as well, and it's there's so much happening at the Essendon Footy Club that it's only the last couple of paras that get to it, but Zach Merritt, he comes out of contract in 12 months' time as well and becomes a free agent. And he's made it clear to both the club and his management that he's not overly happy at Essendon either. I'm sure they'd be almost zero chance to let him go this year because he is contracted. But how did the Bombers manage to convince Merritt that his future, his long-term future is at that football club as well?
Well, they have to change the culture, because obviously the culture is not a place where players want to stay. You mentioned 4 players that have walked out this year, and the list doesn't stop there. It goes all the way back to the likes of Paddy Ryder, who walked out after the drug saga, and they've lost a number of key players. They have brought players in, but it hasn't clicked on the field. So Essendon have to change their culture, make it a place where players want to stay. Otherwise, if a club's offering 2 first-round picks for a player like Merritt, who's a classy midfielder, then maybe Essendon has to restart, let these players go, bring in the draft picks and build up from the ground again.
Speaking of culture, we're going to stay in footy and we're going to turn to South Australia and the Adelaide Crows, where, of course, we saw Tyson Stengel and Brad Crouch. They were pulled over by police in a taxi in the city at 5 a.m. last Monday and allegedly found to be in possession of an illicit substance. They weren't charged by police and they're yet to receive official notification of whether they'll be hit with a strike under the AFL's illicit drugs policy. The Adelaide Football Club is poised to hand down sanctions to Stengel and Crouch by the end of the week. The complicated fact here, of course, is that Brad Crouch is probably, after Joe Daniher, the most sought-after free agent, or Jeremy Cameron as well, I guess. But Brad Crouch, highly unlikely to be playing at the Adelaide Footy Club next year. And any ban that Adelaide passes down, or any sanction that they pass down on Crouch, wouldn't travel to his new club. The only way that would happen is if the AFL imposes its own sanction on the star midfielder. I want to talk about how this incident has impacted Crouch's value on the market. Is there any likelihood that he's not able to now secure a move to another club? And what an appropriate punishment is for Crouch and Stengel?
I don't think it affects his value as such. I think there'll be interest from other clubs for sure. He's a ball magnet who finds the ball. He's an inside player who can get it on the outside. I think a club like Geelong would be a good fit for Brad Crouch, who's in the middle of his footy career. I guess the big thing would be if he copped a strike, and I'm not sure if the AFL would make that public or not. But then that's one strike hanging over a player's head. When you talk about punishments for these players, there sort of are rules for the players that are really good and the players that maybe aren't so good. Like I think back to a guy like Michael Talia on the Swans list, who was caught by police with cocaine, and the Swans stood him down and didn't give him another contract, and that was the end of his career. So I think Stengel's contracted, which is probably something lucky for him, but Adelaide probably be looking to offload Brad Crouch now.
Yeah, you'd think so. And it's been that situation all year that Crouch, despite being such an excellent footballer for them for so long, as part of their rebuild, they were probably happy to see him go. You mentioned Geelong. It seems the obvious home for him. Do we know what other clubs might be in the mix as well?
Well, Geelong seems to be in the mix for all of these top liners. I know a guy like Jack Viney's been mentioned for the Cats as well, and they've probably got to start replacing guys like Gary Ablett who are on the way out, and Joel Selwood's only probably got a year or two left, and they always seem to be in the premiership window as well. They don't really want to bottom out the Cats, and if you're a Cats fan, you'd love what they've brought to the table. But I'm not sure who else might be a good fit. Maybe a club like Melbourne, or even North Melbourne. They've probably got a bit of cash and looking to move up the table.
Yeah, North Melbourne definitely likely to have some cash spare in their salary cap that they will need to spend. Speaking of Geelong, our third story this morning, this one was a cracker, came from Cody Atkinson, and Sean Lawson at the ABC, and they've looked into the data and some of the statistics of the double chance in AFL, NRL. They've also used, for the sake of this conversation, the sample and the waffle competitions as well. Of course, the double chance, the reward that goes to teams who finish in the top four and are given the opportunity to lose one final and continue to progress. If we have a look at the the rate of what happens after the double chance comes into play here in the VFL/AFL, since 1931, 33% of teams with the double chance have had a straight sets exit, but it's just under 30% of teams with a double chance who've gone on to win the premiership, which is a pretty remarkable stat. We look at this weekend, Geelong, Collingwood, Richmond, St Kilda as well. The two double chance teams there in Geelong and Richmond have both spent a lot of time in the business end of finals in recent years. What are their premiership hopes looking like now? Do they still look like teams that could go all the way this year, despite their losses in the first week of finals, Damien?
Well, the way I read that stat is the second week of finals, it can be the best team wins, but the third week of finals, that team that's had a week off has a massive advantage. Not only do they have they had a rest and they're freshened up, but they often have a home ground advantage too, and we'll see that with Port Adelaide next week. They're able to play in Adelaide, and of course Brisbane. Well, the rest of the finals are played in Brisbane. So, and they surprised me with the crowd they had against Richmond last week. So, look, as far as this weekend, I think Richmond will be too classy for the Saints. The Cats versus the Pies is a 50-50 game. I'm a Pie supporter, so I'll put up my hand now. I probably went into the game against West Coast with my fingers crossed, but they couldn't have played better against a side who had everything going for them. Home ground advantage, hadn't lost at the ground in front of their home crowd this year. They beat the Pies by 11 goals, and the Pies were able to turn the tables and upset them. So the Cats are a side that the Pies match up well against, so that's going to be the match of the round. But then, of course, they will come up against a Brisbane side who has had a week off and will get to play in front of their home crowd. So, yeah, I think it's Richmond this week in a 50-50 game against Geelong and Cats. But then Port and Brisbane are obviously the favourites to make it into the grand final.
Talking about that Collingwood-Geelong game, and these stats will be music to your ears as a Pies fan, Damien. In the last two matches between Geelong and Collingwood, Tom Hawkins has been kept goalless by the Magpies backline. Of course, they denied him the space in which to lead. You've had secondary defenders peeling off to help his direct opponent. Containing Hawkins is crucial to beating Geelong. As this article tells us, the Cats have won 71% of their matches when he kicks 2 or more goals in the last 4 years, compared to 46% when he hasn't. When he's not firing, Geelong's attack is easier to shut down. How critical is it to keep Tom Hawkins under wraps this Saturday, and who gets the job?
Yeah, no doubt. Tough job. Depends if they bring in a guy like Asava Ratugolea as a bit of foil for Hawkins. I think Roughhead's probably the obvious matchup. He's not that quick, but he's strong. He's got the reach. And that frees up Darcy Moore to sort of play that intercept mark. And if Ratugolea comes in, well, Darcy Moore's sort of that athletic, mobile defender that can go with Ratugolea. So they've got a couple of options, the Pies. Their defence has been great all year. The way they played against West Coast, they were probably a bit more attacking, which opened them up a little bit more. But West Coast kicked 5 of their goals from centre clearances. So outside of those 5 goals, you take them off West Coast scoreboard, and they only kicked about 40 points through general play last week. So, yeah, the Pies will be relying on that defence to get the job done again this week.
We turned from footy to cricket, and a wonderful achievement secured here in Brisbane yesterday by the Australian women's cricket team. They have equalled the world record 21-game one-day international winning streak, which of course was set by the Australian men's team captained by Ricky Ponting back in 2003. Just a little 232-run thrashing of the Kiwis at Allan Border Field yesterday, if you don't mind, as Phil Lutton tells us in the Sydney Morning Herald. I think the remarkable thing about this story from mine is that the mentality of the Australian women's team shows that this 21-game winning streak begun when they lost the semi-final at the 2017 Cricket World Cup against India. And since then, that's when they've been on their winning streak. They've also won a T20 World Cup during that time. They managed to do this yesterday. And the Kiwis, yeah, this was a dominant win, but they're generally a decent team and a good challenger to the Aussies as well. This was achieved yesterday without Elise Perry, the superstar who's been really pretty unlucky with injuries over the last 6 to 9 months. Also without captain Meg Lanning. Just how good is the achievement, or how amazing is the achievement, Damien? How good is the team, and how much longer can we expect to see them performing at such an exceptional level?
Well, it's a brilliant achievement. I caught some of that match yesterday on 9Gem. I think New Zealand would have been deflated by putting down a couple of chances. I think Rachel Haynes sort of stepped into that void left by Meg Lanning and piled on the runs. I think she got really close to a ton. She might have scored about 96 off 102. Some of the shots that they played, I'm not being disrespectful, they look like men the way they play their shots. One bounce to the boundary and just like rockets to the fence. They're on another planet, that team. And you mentioned the winning streak. It deserves all the accolades it gets, and with no Meg Lanning, no Elise Perry, you add those two to the side and they're going to keep winning. I think it is. I think they do have a break now. It's not until 2021 until their next game, so a little time to refreshen up and they'll be focused to keep that winning streak going, especially one more game for them to have that record outright.
Yeah, Rachel Haynes skippered the team in Lanning's absence, knocked off a very classy 96. And looking at the team that was selected yesterday, Haynes is the only one in the team over the age of 30. So there's plenty of youth in there. You know, Annabelle Sutherland is only 18. Really exciting to think. And even, you know, Lanning and Perry, they're both under 30 as well. So there's no reason why this team can't continue to go on and not only equal but break records. But they will have a long break now before. I don't even think that fixture's confirmed who their next opponent would be as they look to break the world record. It could be India or it could be New Zealand across the ditch. Some nervous months ahead, but a wonderful achievement from that team. All right, now we've got the chief racing rider of the age on the show. We need to talk some racing. Firstly, our final story, which is a bit news-based, and then we might have a look at the weekend ahead. This one comes from Andrew Eddy at racing.com. Having a look at Ben Melham, who will have one of his 7 betting charges dropped, the jockey, after the Victorian Racing Tribunal indicated charge 5 is not a valid charge under the Australian rules of racing. The VRT's chairman, Judge John Bowman, said in his ruling that while he believed the charge for alleged betting on races in another jurisdiction in Singapore was invalid, he would need at least one other tribunal member to sit on the case and make such a ruling. That's likely to happen later in November when the 3-person panel assembles to hear the other 6 charges. But it opens the door, you know, massively for Australian jockeys to bet on international races if this is to be the case, that charge is deemed invalid. Damien, can you take us back through the charges that have been laid against Ben Melham, when we can expect a resolution, and what this ruling yesterday, what that means for Melham and all other jockeys here in Australia?
Yeah, well, I read it the exact same way, that they're going to be, that opens the door for jockeys to bet on international races. The way it played out, the rule is that you can't bet on thoroughbred racing, but Melham's defence argued that the Australian rules of racing only cover Australian thoroughbred racing, and that's the way that it was found this week. Ironically, Judge Bowman, who was the chair of the Racing Appeals and Disciplinary Board, actually penalised another jockey in 2016 for placing a $20 bet on a race at Deauville in France. That jockey had a 3-week suspension and was forced to undergo counselling. And Judge Bowman, in his response yesterday, apologised and said, I made the wrong mistake. In his defence, the jockey pled guilty, and there was no talk that international racing wasn't covered under the rules. But obviously in this case, it was challenged, and with a bit of scrutiny, he's determined that that it's free reign. So that does open the door now, I think, for Australian jockeys to bet on international racing, as long as they're not getting any inside information or something like that, which would make it more serious. But this doesn't let Ben Melham off the hook. He still has a number of other charges, including allegedly betting through his partner's account, including races that he was riding in, and that's the most serious of the charges. James McDonald, champion rider in Sydney, copped 2 years for placing a bet on a horse that he rode and won. And if you go back even further than that, Damien Oliver copped a 9-month suspension for betting on another horse to win in the race that he was riding in, and that was sort of the catalyst for trying to stamp this out. So it's certainly the charges are serious, but Ben Melham's defending all of those charges, and I think they'll be heard just after the Spring Carnival in November, in a bit of clean air due to COVID. The vacancy of the county court has meant that it's been pushed back, but he'll get his chance to defend those charges in November.
Just for clarity, can you just advise Ben Melham, the bet on a race in which he rode, was that on his own mount?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
And with the jurisdiction not necessarily extending beyond Australia, what ramifications are there then for jockeys who do ride for trainers and owners based in New Zealand, in Japan, obviously the foreign raiders coming over for the Spring Carnival? I mean, could Jamie Carr technically place a bet on Prince of Arran, running on the other side of the world?
Good question. Other side of the world. Well, this sort of decision sort of opens up that door, doesn't it? It only happened really last night, so they're questions we probably have to put to Racing Victoria. That they might still have the opportunity to appeal this decision and argue that they don't want jockeys jockeys betting in races at all. And it also might see an amendment to the Australian rules of racing, which they can do, where Melham's found innocent at this time, but they put in a new rule going forward that they don't want jockeys betting on races overseas. So, a lot to play out.
They could become like us mug punters and end up at Turfentine late in the evening after a few too many beers. We've got to finish up really quickly, Damien, but before I let you go, it's a huge day of racing on Saturday. 8 of the 10 races on the card at Caulfield are at group level, and 3 big group races at Randwick as well for the 3-year-olds, who are a couple of the main runners to watch.
Well, obviously this weekend we see the Caulfield Guineas and the 1,000 Guineas. These are races that are grand finals for these 3-year-olds. Ole Kirk has relations to Black Caviar. He's the hot favourite in the Caulfield Guineas. He's already a Group 1 winner coming off a win in the Golden Rose, and he's the one to beat. The big query on him is how much rain we get now at Caulfield, because as a 2-year-old, he didn't really handle the wet, so that would open up the race. The 1,000 Guineas, Chris Waller has Hungry Heart, who was a disappointing second in the Flight Stakes last week, but as long as she backs up off the 7-day break, she'll be the one to beat. And then, of course, Russian Camelot runs in the Caulfield Stakes. This is a race that isn't necessarily the grand final. It's generally a key lead up to the Cups and the Cox Plate. He's a $3.50 favourite for the Cox Plate. I think he'll go around about $1.60 on Saturday in the Caulfield Stakes, and if he puts them away, he deserves favouritism. He's not up against the internationals, though, so that's going to add a flavour to the Cox Plate. The internationals arrived last week. They're still doing their quarantine, and they'll be out next Saturday for the Caulfield Cup. So, it's certainly a moving day in racing.
$1.60, better than bank interest, and it's a small Winx-like field. So Russian Camelot, one to watch. Order of the Garter, another one going around on Saturday that plenty will be watching. And you mentioned Hungry Heart. I think the blinker's on for the first time there as well. Yeah. Damien Ractliffe, fantastic to have you on the Best on Ground Weekday Kickoff. Really, really appreciate you giving up your time, and love to have you back on again while the Spring Carnival's still up and running.
Thanks, Peter. Chat soon.
You've been watching and listening to the Best on Ground Weekday Kickoff. We'll see you tomorrow with Jimmy Tucker to preview the Bledisloe Cup. Cheers.